Have you ever noticed how the world seems to get quieter as you grow older? Not in sound, but in expectations. As if somehow, after decades of living, you're suddenly expected to become invisible, to stop wanting things, to stop dreaming, to gracefully fade into the background while the rest of the world moves on. What if I told you that the years after 60 could be the most authentic chapters of your entire life? Today, we're talking about something vital that no one seems to discuss: reclaiming your right to exist boldly after 60. Not just exist, but thrive. Because too many of us have been handed a script that says our most meaningful contributions are behind us, that we should be grateful for whatever attention we receive, apologetic about our needs, and careful not to take up too much space. I'm going to share with you 8 sacred things you should never surrender, not even for the people you love most. By the end of our time together, you'll understand how to protect your essence in a world that often misunderstands the wisdom of age. You'll learn practical ways to honor your journey and your right to continue evolving. Most importantly, you'll discover that this stage of life isn't about resignation, it's about revelation. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe and join our community of souls who refuse to disappear with age. Now, to help you see this more clearly, I want to tell you a story. It begins in a small-town library lounge where quiet is not silence but invitation. Thomas, 65, has stopped moving, not physically, but inwardly. Something in him has gone still, the part that used to want things. He sits, cup in hand, staring at a window that reflects more regret than light. Across from him, Mr. Ellis watches. Not judging, just remembering. At 82, Mr. Ellis knows the stillness, but he also knows it doesn't have to mean surrender. He leans forward and begins to speak. Not like a teacher, but like a man who once broke down quietly in the middle of a perfectly good day. "You know," Mr. Ellis begins, his voice soft enough that Thomas has to lean in slightly to hear him. "I see that look in your eyes. I wore it myself for almost a decade." Thomas shifts uncomfortably. He hadn't expected conversation, especially not one that felt like someone reading his private thoughts. "What look is that?" "The one that says you've handed over the keys to your own life," Mr. Ellis replies. "The one that says you're just a passenger now." Thomas stares into his cooling tea. The library around them hums with quiet activity. A young mother guiding her child through picture books, a teenager hunched over textbooks, an older woman scanning periodicals with fierce concentration. Life continuing in all its stages. "I'm retired," Thomas says finally. "My kids are grown. My wife is busy with her new consulting work. I'm just adjusting." Mr. Ellis nods. Adjusting. That's what we call it when we're shrinking to fit other people's expectations. "I don't know what you mean," Thomas replies, but his eyes say otherwise. "Let me ask you something," Mr. Ellis continues. "When was the last time you did something purely because you wanted to, not because it was practical or expected or helpful to someone else, just because it lit something up inside you?" Thomas opens his mouth to answer, then closes it. The silence stretches between them. "That's what I thought," Mr. Ellis says kindly. "You know, after my wife died and my daughter moved overseas with her family, I spent 3 years living like I was waiting for permission to continue. Permission from whom? I couldn't have told you, but I felt it, this sense that wanting things, needing things, was somehow inappropriate at my age." "How did you get past it?" Thomas asks, leaning forward slightly, his tea forgotten. "I realize there are certain things I should never give up, not even for the people I love most," Mr. Ellis says, his eyes bright with conviction. "Essential. Parts of myself that I had been surrendering piece by piece, thinking that's what maturity meant, that's what being considerate meant." Thomas studies Mr. Ellis's face, noting the lines of experience, but also a quality of lightness he hadn't noticed before. "And what were those things?" The library has grown quieter as the afternoon stretches on. A soft chime indicates 15 minutes until closing. Neither man moves to leave. Mr. Ellis smiles. There are 8 of them. 8 sacred things that no one should ever surrender, especially not after a lifetime of giving. Would you like to hear them? Thomas checks his watch, then deliberately puts his hand back on the table. I have nowhere else I need to be, he says, and for the first time that day, it doesn't sound like resignation but choice. Outside the window, the light has shifted, painting the library in amber tones that make everything look slightly gilded. A metaphor, perhaps, for how perspective can transform the ordinary. Behind the circulation desk, the librarian, a woman, perhaps in her 70s, with a silver braid and bright eyes, glances at them and smiles knowingly, as if she understands exactly what conversation is taking place. Good, Mr. Ellis nods, because what I'm about to share with you, it's not just about surviving these years. It's about claiming them, owning them, making them yours in a way perhaps no other time in your life has truly been. Thomas sits a little straighter, his reflection in the window now competing with the world outside rather than being swallowed by it. He's listening not just with his ears, but with something deeper, a part of himself that had gone quiet so gradually he hadn't noticed its silence until now. I believe, Mr. Ellis begins, his voice taking on a tone of gentle authority, that after 60, the most radical thing you can do is refuse to disappear, not just physically, but essentially, to insist on your right to continue becoming. Thomas nods slowly. That sounds revolutionary. It shouldn't be, Mr. Ellis replies, but in a world that equates value with productivity and wisdom with compliance, simply existing on your own terms becomes an act of defiance. A young couple walks past their table, absorbed in each other, barely noticing the 2 older men deep in conversation. Thomas watches them briefly, then turns back to Mr. Ellis. I used to think that growing older meant growing smaller, Thomas admits, taking up less space, wanting less, expecting less, as if the very act of aging was a process of diminishment. Many of us do, Mr. Ellis acknowledges. We mistake accommodation for grace. We confuse self-erasure with selflessness. But what if the greatest gift we could give to those around us and to ourselves was our full, undiminished presence, our authentic selves, not filtered through anyone else's comfort or convenience? Thomas considers this, turning the idea over in his mind like a smooth stone. I'm not sure I remember what that looks like anymore. My authentic self. That's exactly where these 8 principles come in, Mr. Ellis replies. They're not rules to follow so much as territories to reclaim, parts of yourself to remember and protect. The librarian approaches their table with a gentle smile. Gentlemen, we'll be closing in 5 minutes, but you're welcome to continue your conversation in the cafe next door. They're open until 8. Mr. Ellis thanks her with a nod. What do you say, Thomas? Shall we continue this over something stronger than tea? I find that wisdom often goes down better with a touch of whiskey. Thomas laughs, surprised by the sound. I'd like that, very much. As they gather their things, Thomas notices another man about his age, sitting alone a few tables away, phone in hand, scrolling with a vacant expression. He recognizes the look, the quiet resignation, the automated movements of someone going through the motions. For the first time in months, Thomas feels something like purpose stir within him. You know, he says to Mr. Ellis as they walk toward the door, I think I needed to hear this today. Whatever these 8 things are, I think I've been surrendering them without even knowing their names. Mr. Ellis places a steady hand on Thomas's shoulder. Most of us do, but naming them is the first step to reclaiming them. He pushes open the heavy library door, letting in a rush of late afternoon air. And believe me when I say, the reclaiming, that's where life begins again. Those who haven't subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Back to where we were. As they step outside into the golden hour light, Thomas feels something shift inside him. Not a dramatic transformation, but the quiet click of a door unlocking. A door he hadn't realized was closed, and beyond it, 8 truths waiting to be remembered. The cafe next door to the library is a small, warm space with wooden tables and jazz playing softly in the background. Thomas and Mr. Ellis settle into a corner booth, each with a drink. Whiskey for Ellis, coffee for Thomas. The evening crowd is sparse. A few students with laptops, a couple in quiet conversation, and the barista wiping down the counter with unhurried movements. "So," Thomas says after taking a sip of his coffee, "these 8 things you mentioned, the ones we shouldn't surrender." Mr. Ellis nods, his eyes bright in the ambient lighting. "Let's start with the first, shall we? The first thing you should never give up is your pace." "My pace," Thomas repeats. "Yes, your right to move through life at the speed that suits you." Mr. Ellis leans forward slightly. "They'll rush you to recover from loss, to make decisions, to adapt to change. But you don't owe the world your urgency. You get to move. Slow now, on purpose." Thomas's brow furrows. "But doesn't that inconvenience others? My daughter is always saying I need to keep up with how things work now." "That's exactly my point," Mr. Ellis says. "We've spent decades accommodating other people's timelines, meeting deadlines, being punctual, rushing through transitions because others were waiting. But now we have earned the right to inhabit our own rhythm." He takes a small sip of his whiskey, letting the idea settle. "Think about it this way. When you were younger, speed was often necessary. Raising children, building careers, juggling responsibilities. But speed has a cost. It sacrifices depth, nuance, presence. I remember always feeling behind," Thomas admits, "like I was perpetually catching up. And now I feel guilty for not keeping up. My son-in-law tried to teach me about streaming services 3 times, always with that look of barely concealed impatience. Eventually, I just nodded and said I understood." Mr. Ellis nods knowingly. "But did that serve either of you? You didn't learn, and he didn't really help." "No," Thomas agrees quietly. "That's where reclaiming your pace comes in. It means saying, I need you to explain this one more time without apology. It means taking 3 days to make a decision that others want you to make in 3 minutes. It means grieving for as long as grief requires, not for as long as others can tolerate witnessing it." Thomas considers this, turning his mug slowly between his hands. "Doesn't that make me selfish?" Mr. Ellis smiles. "It makes you sovereign. There's a difference. Selfish means disregarding others entirely. Sovereign means honoring your own needs alongside theirs, not instead of, but not subordinate to either." I like that word. Sovereign, Thomas says, testing it out. "I can't remember the last time I felt that way." "Let me give you an example," Mr. Ellis continues. "Last year, my grandson came to visit. Brilliant boy, always in motion. He wanted to show me everything, do everything, explain everything, all at once. By the second day, I was exhausted trying to match his energy, so I sat him down and told him, I love your enthusiasm, but I experience the world at a different speed now. Not a worse speed, maybe even a better one, but different." What did he say? He asked what I meant. I told him I notice things he might miss. The way light changes in a room throughout the day, the subtle shift in someone's expression when they're holding something back, the layered meanings in a simple exchange. I said I'd spent 60 years racing through rooms, and now I wanted to truly see them. Thomas nods, recognition flickering across his face. After that, Mr. Ellis continues, we developed a rhythm. Mornings were his tempo. We'd do whatever he wanted, at his pace. Afternoons were mine, slower, more contemplative, and you know what? By the end of his visit, he told me he'd learned more during our slow afternoons than he had in months of scrolling through videos online. Thomas's expression softens. That's beautiful. A compromise that honored you both. Exactly. Your pace isn't just about slowing down, though often it is. It's about claiming the right to experience life at the speed that allows you to fully inhabit it. Sometimes that means taking an hour to enjoy a meal that others wolf down in 10 minutes. Sometimes it means saying, I need to think about this, when others want an immediate answer. I could try that, Thomas says thoughtfully. Start small, Mr. Ellis suggests. Next time someone rushes you to make a decision, to get over a disappointment, to master a new skill, simply say, I move at a different pace now. No apology, no explanation beyond that, just a gentle statement of fact. Thomas sits a little straighter. I move at a different pace now, he practices, his voice gaining confidence with each word. Perfect, Mr. Ellis nods approvingly. Now, shall we move on to the second thing you should never surrender? Thomas nods eagerly. The second is your storyline, Mr. Ellis states firmly. For years, people tried to reframe my past. Tell me, what parts mattered, what parts didn't. My daughter would reminisce about family vacations while glossing over the years I worked 2 jobs to put her through college. Friends would talk about my career achievements, but never about the poems I wrote in private, as if certain parts of my life were more valid than others. I know exactly what you mean, Thomas says, animated now. My kids have this selective memory. They remember the times I missed a soccer game, but forget the years I coached their teams. They remember when I was strict, but not the times I bent rules to give them freedom. Yes, Mr. Ellis agrees. People, even those who love us, often reduce our lives to the parts that fit their preferred narrative. But your life is not a press release. You get to keep every messy, beautiful paragraph. How do you do that, though? Practically speaking, you become the primary narrator of your own life, Mr. Ellis explains. When someone says, remember when you were so focused on work you hardly had time for family, you say, that's one way to see it. I remember working hard to create security for the people I loved most. You don't argue with their version, you simply place your version alongside it. Thomas nods slowly, absorbing this. I think I understand. People are always telling me how lucky I am to have the time to just relax now, as if 40 years of work earned me nothing but the right to sit quietly in the corner. Exactly, Mr. Ellis confirms. They're writing your epilogue while you're still living chapters they can't imagine. Hitting the like button is a small gesture, but it tells us these videos matter to someone, maybe to you. Continuing, the barista brings over a small plate of biscotti, complimentary with their drinks. Mr. Ellis thanks her with a warm smile that she returns before moving away. You know, Thomas says, reaching for a biscotti, I used to paint. Years ago, before the kids, before the mortgage, I was actually quite good. And no one remembers that part of your story. No one even knows it. It's like my life began when I became a husband and father. Everything before that, and everything private since, just doesn't feature in the family lore. Mr. Ellis nods. That's precisely why we must protect our storylines. Not just the past, but the present too. The parts no one witnesses or values, but that are essential to who we are. How do you suggest doing that? Tell your stories, even when no one asks. Write them down. Share the parts of yourself that others have forgotten or never knew. Correct. Gentle misrepresentations of your motivations, your choices, your dreams, not defensively, but matter-of-factly. Thomas is quiet for a moment. I have a shed in the backyard. I've been thinking of clearing it out, maybe setting up an easel again. That's a perfect start, Mr. Ellis encourages. Reclaiming your storyline isn't just about words. It's about actions that honor the full breadth of who you are. I like that, Thomas says, his voice stronger now. So that's 2 things, my pace and my storyline. What's the third? The third is perhaps the most precious, your curiosity. Mr. Ellis's eyes crinkle at the corners. I realized one day that I had stopped wondering about things. Not because I knew everything, far from it, but because I had unconsciously decided that my time for discovery was over. That hits home, Thomas admits. I used to devour books on history, astronomy, art. Somewhere along the way, I just stopped. I can tell you exactly when I began to feel old, and it wasn't because of my aches or my wrinkles. Mr. Ellis leans forward, his voice low as if sharing a secret. It was the day I stopped looking things up, stopped asking why and how and what if, as if questions belonged only to the young. When did you get it back? Your curiosity? It was after my wife died. I was sitting in our garden, looking at a particular flower she had planted. A purple one with an unusual shape. In all our years together, I'd never asked its name. It felt like such a loss suddenly, not knowing what to call this thing she had loved. Mr. Ellis pauses, looking into his whiskey. So I took a picture with my phone and used one of those plant identifier apps my grandson had installed. Turned out it was a liatris, also called blazing star or gay feather. Learning that small fact, it was like a door opening after being closed for years. What happened next? Thomas asks, genuinely engaged. I became insatiable, Mr. Ellis chuckles. I started looking up everything. The etymology of words I'd used my whole life without knowing their origins. The history of my neighborhood, how to make sourdough bread from scratch. I signed up for online courses. I joined a philosophy discussion group at this very cafe. He gestures around them, and Thomas notices a small chalkboard near the counter announcing Philosopher's Corner, Thursdays 6 p.m. When I got my curiosity back, Mr. Ellis continues, I remembered how to live. I looked at the sky again, really. I Googled things. I flirted with ideas and occasionally with my neighbor's sister, though badly. He chuckles. Thomas laughs too. A real laugh that seems to surprise him with its authenticity. Your curiosity is the antidote to resignation, Mr. Ellis says more seriously. It's what keeps you from calcifying into a fixed version of yourself. And it's never too late to wonder again. I've forgotten how to be curious, Thomas admits. Where would I even start? Start with questions, not answers, Mr. Ellis suggests. Next time you watch the news and they mention a place you've never been, look it up. When you hear a word you don't fully understand, investigate it. When your grandchildren talk about their interests, ask them to explain rather than nodding along. Thomas considers this. My grandson is obsessed with some online game. I always just tune out when he talks about it. Ask him to show you next time. You don't have to play it. Just understand why he loves it. Mr. Ellis smiles. Curiosity doesn't mean you have to adopt new technologies or hobbies. It just means you remain open to understanding them. Thomas nods, something lightening in his expression. That feels possible. More than possible. Natural. We're born. Curious? It's our default state. We just forget permission to stay that way. Mr. Ellis finishes his whiskey. Ready for the fourth thing you should never surrender? Thomas checks his watch, then deliberately puts his hand back on the table. Absolutely. I'm in no hurry. Mr. Ellis smiles at this small reclamation of pace. The fourth is your emotional intuition. You already know when something feels wrong, when a relationship is draining you, when an obligation has become a burden, when someone's expectations have become a cage. But at this age, we stop pretending it's fine. We walk away. We cut I call short, we don't explain. Thomas looks uncertain. That sounds difficult. It is at first, Mr. Ellis acknowledges. We've spent decades being amenable, responsible, considering everyone's needs. But here's what I've learned. Accommodating everyone else's comfort while sacrificing your own isn't wisdom. It's habit. And habits can be broken. Can you give me an example? Thomas asks. Of course. For years I had a friend, let's call him Robert, good man in many ways, but after every visit with him, I felt depleted. He had strong opinions, interrupted often, rarely asked questions, but we'd been friends for 30 years, so I kept making those lunch dates. What changed? After I turned 75, I began to think more carefully about how I spent my energy. I realized I only had so many lunches left in my life. Did I want to spend them feeling drained? Mr. Ellis shakes his head. So the next time he called, I simply said I couldn't meet regularly anymore. I wished him well, told him I valued our history, and suggested we move to occasional phone calls instead. Was he upset? Initially. But that's the thing about emotional intuition at our age. You realize that managing other people's reactions to your boundaries isn't your responsibility anymore. I was kind but firm, and afterward I felt lighter than I had in years. Thomas stares into his coffee. There's a weekly family dinner at my daughter's house. It's chaotic, loud. The grandkids are wonderful but overwhelming. Sometimes I just want a quiet evening, but I feel obligated to go every time. And how do you feel afterward? Exhausted. It takes me 2 days to recover. Mr. Ellis nods. That's your emotional intuition speaking. It's telling you something important about your needs. But if I skip dinner, they'll think I don't care. Or you could trust them with the truth, that you care deeply, but need a different rhythm of connection. Perhaps dinner every other week, and a quieter visit on the off weeks with just one grandchild at a time. Thomas considers this, hope and hesitation mingling in his expression. Your emotional intuition, Mr. Ellis continues, is sharper now than it's ever been. You've had decades to learn the difference between discomfort that leads to growth and discomfort that leads to depletion. Trust that wisdom. But how do you set boundaries without feeling guilty? You practice, Mr. Ellis says simply. You start small. Maybe you don't answer the phone every time it rings. Maybe you leave an event when you feel tired rather than when it officially ends. Maybe you say, I need to think about that instead of agreeing immediately when asked for a favor. The cafe has grown busier around them, the after-dinner crowd filtering in. A woman at the next table laughs loudly at something her companion said, and Thomas notices that Mr. Ellis doesn't flinch or look annoyed. He simply adjusts his position slightly to maintain their conversation bubble. What you're describing, Thomas says slowly, is a kind of freedom I'm not sure I've ever had. That's exactly what it is, Mr. Ellis affirms. Freedom from obligation without purpose. Freedom from social expectations that don't serve your well-being. Freedom to choose connection that nourishes rather than depletes. Thomas is quiet for a long moment. These first 4 things, my pace, my storyline, my curiosity, my emotional intuition, they're all connected, aren't they? Perceptive observation, Mr. Ellis smiles approvingly. Yes, they form a foundation. When you reclaim your pace, you create space to remember your full storyline. When you honor your storyline, curiosity reawakens naturally. And when curiosity is alive in you again, your emotional intuition becomes clear and trustworthy. Thomas takes a deep breath, as if physically making room for these ideas. And you said there are 4 more? Indeed there are, Mr. Ellis confirms, equally important pieces of yourself to reclaim. But perhaps we should pause here. Give you time to sit with these first 4. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a sovereign self. Thomas finds himself nodding. I think you're right. This is a lot to consider. Good things, important things, but a lot. Exactly right, Mr. Ellis says warmly. Honoring your pace means not rushing through wisdom just because it's available. These ideas need time to root before we add more. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, the cafe buzzing around them in contrast to their small island of contemplation. Thank you, Thomas says finally, for seeing me, for recognizing that look in my eyes. I recognized it because I wore it myself, Mr. Ellis replies, and someone took the time to show me a different way to live these later years. Not as an epilogue, but as the chapters where the story gets truly interesting. If this topic interests, You, comment 1 below. This helps me better understand what you like. Continuing, the following Thursday, Thomas returns to the cafe. He arrives early, watching people come and go. Young professionals with laptops, mothers with small children, a few people his own age reading or chatting quietly. When Mr. Ellis walks in, Thomas waves him over, a genuine smile brightening his face. "You look different," Mr. Ellis observes as he settles into his chair. "Something's changed." "I've been practicing," Thomas admits. "The things you shared last week, they've been on my mind constantly." "Tell me," Mr. Ellis encourages, signaling the barista for his usual whiskey. "I skipped Sunday dinner at my daughter's," Thomas says, a note of wonder in his voice. "I called her on Saturday and said I needed a quiet evening to myself, but I'd love to take my grandson fishing on Monday instead. And she was surprised but fine with it. We had a wonderful time on Monday, just the two of us. He taught me about some video game he loves, and I showed him how to bait a hook. It was peaceful." Mr. Ellis nods approvingly. "You honored your pace and your emotional intuition." "Yes," Thomas agrees. "And something else happened. I found an old sketchbook in my closet. I've started drawing again, nothing serious, just rough sketches of the backyard, the birds at my feeder, but it feels like remembering a language I'd forgotten I could speak." "You're reclaiming your storyline," Mr. Ellis says warmly. "Excellent." There. Drinks arrive, whiskey for Ellis, coffee for Thomas. Around them the cafe hums with quiet conversation. "I'm ready to hear about the other 4 things," Thomas says. "The rest of what I should never surrender." Mr. Ellis smiles. "Then let's begin with the 5th, your solitude. Many of us grow up believing that being alone is something to avoid, a punishment or a failure. We rush to fill silent spaces with noise, empty moments with activity. But solitude is not the absence of connection, it's a form of connection with yourself." Thomas nods slowly. "I've been afraid of being alone. Since my wife started her consulting work, the house feels too empty sometimes." "There's a difference between loneliness and solitude," Mr. Ellis explains. "Loneliness is the painful awareness of being disconnected. Solitude is the peaceful awareness of being connected to yourself. I'm not sure I know how to experience that kind of solitude." "It takes practice," Mr. Ellis acknowledges. "For me, it began after my wife died. At first, the silence in our home was unbearable. I kept the television on constantly, not even watching it, just needing the sound of human voices." He takes a thoughtful sip of his whiskey before continuing. "Then one morning, I forgot to turn it on. I was making breakfast and suddenly realized I was hearing birds outside the window, the ticking of the clock my father had given us, the subtle sounds of my own breathing. And instead of rushing to fill that space, I just stayed in it." "What happened?" Thomas asks. "I remembered myself," Mr. Ellis says simply. "All the parts that had been drowned out by noise and obligation and routine. I rediscovered thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to think in years. Not just memories, but new ideas. Dreams I'd set aside. Questions I'd never explored." Thomas looks intrigued but uncertain. "How do you cultivate that, practically speaking?" "Start small. Create pockets of deliberate solitude. 15 minutes in the morning with just your thoughts and a cup of tea. A walk without your phone. An evening without television. Don't fill these spaces with activity. Just be present in them." "I think I could do that," Thomas says thoughtfully. "The key is to approach solitude not as something to endure, but as something to savor," Mr. Ellis continues. "To recognize it as a gift you give yourself, the gift of your own undivided attention." "I like that framing," Thomas nods. "Solitude as a gift, not a punishment." "Exactly. And here's something else I've learned. The quality of your solitude determines the quality of your connections with others. When you're comfortable being alone with yourself, you bring a fullness to your relationships instead of a neediness. Thomas sits with this idea for a moment. I think that's what's been happening with my grandson. Because I wasn't desperate for his attention or approval, we actually connected more authentically. That's precisely it, Mr. Ellis affirms. Your solitude is the well from which you draw when giving to others. If the well is dry, you have nothing to offer but your thirst. A small group enters the cafe, filling the space with momentary noise before settling at a table across the room. Thomas and Mr. Ellis wait for the brief disruption to pass before continuing. So that's the fifth thing, my solitude, Thomas summarizes. What's the sixth? Mr. Ellis's eyes crinkle with warm humor. The sixth thing you should never surrender is your sense of humor, particularly about yourself. People think wisdom comes wrapped in solemnity and serious expressions, but I've found the opposite to be true. The wisest souls I've known have all possessed the ability to laugh at life's absurdities and at their own. I used to have a good sense of humor, Thomas muses. Somewhere along the way, life got too serious. That happens to many of us, Mr. Ellis nods. We mistake gravitas for maturity, but humor is not frivolous. It's essential. It's what keeps us from becoming bitter when life disappoints us, which it inevitably will. How do you maintain it? Especially through difficult times? By recognizing the cosmic joke that is human existence, Mr. Ellis says with a gentle laugh. We're all just trying our best with limited information, stumbling toward significance, taking ourselves far too seriously along the way. He leans forward, eyes twinkling. Let me tell you a story. Last year I developed arthritis in my hands. Quite painful some days. One morning I was struggling to open a jar of jam, twisting and turning, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, I put it down and said aloud to the empty kitchen, "Well, this is a ridiculous design flaw in the human body. Who approved these blueprints?" Thomas chuckles. And suddenly I was laughing, Mr. Ellis continues, not because the pain was funny, but because the alternative was to rage against the inevitable. Humor allowed me to acknowledge the difficulty without being defined by it. I think I understand, Thomas says. It's about perspective. Precisely, humor creates distance between you and your circumstances. It allows you to say, "This is happening, but it is not all that I am." Thomas nods thoughtfully. I've been so caught up in the seriousness of aging, the losses, the changes, that I've lost sight of the absurdity of it all. And there is absurdity, Mr. Ellis confirms with a smile. The way our bodies betray us in embarrassing moments, the way technology seems deliberately designed to confuse us, the way young people look at us as if we're artifacts from another century, which to be fair we are. They both laugh, a genuine shared moment of recognition. Start looking for the humor in daily frustrations, Mr. Ellis suggests. When you drop something and your knees protest as you bend to pick it up, make a joke instead of a complaint. When you forget a word mid-sentence, take a bow as if you've performed a magic trick, making vocabulary disappear. I like that, Thomas says, his expression lighter than when they began, finding the comedy in the tragedy. Without humor, Mr. Ellis says more seriously, we become rigid, brittle. With it, we remain flexible, resilient, and flexibility of body and spirit is what allows us to keep bending without breaking as we age. The cafe has grown busier around them, a small live jazz trio setting up in the corner. The pianist, a woman with silver hair and bright red glasses, catches Mr. Ellis's eye and waves. He waves back with a warm smile. "Friend of yours?" Thomas asks. "More than a friend on occasion," Mr. Ellis replies with a wink. "Another benefit of maintaining your sense of humor. It makes you far more attractive than a perpetual frown." Thomas laughs, surprised by the candor. "That's good to know. Now shall we move on to the seventh thing you should never surrender?" Mr. Ellis asks. "Please," Thomas nods, fully engaged now. "The seventh is your right to be misunderstood," Mr. Ellis states. Throughout our lives, we expend enormous energy trying to make others understand us. Our motives, our feelings, our decisions. We explain and justify and defend as if perpetually on trial. He takes a slow sip of his whiskey. But there comes a point when you realize that being understood by everyone is both impossible and unnecessary. Some people will misinterpret your choices no matter how carefully you explain them. Others simply lack the context or capacity to comprehend your experience. So we just accept being misunderstood? Thomas asks, sounding uncertain. Not exactly, Mr. Ellis clarifies. You become selective about where you invest the energy of explanation. You share your truth with those who have earned the right to hear it. For others, you offer a simple statement of fact without justification. This is what works for me becomes enough. Thomas considers this. I'm always explaining myself to my children, why I don't want to move closer to them, why I'm not interested in the senior community they found, why I still drive my own car. And does all that explaining change their perspective? Rarely, Thomas admits. They still think they know what's best for me. That's because their concern for you, genuine as it may be, is filtered through their own needs and fears. Mr. Ellis explains, your independence reminds them of your mortality, which frightens them. Your self-sufficiency challenges their desire to be needed. Thomas nods slowly, recognition dawning. So instead of endless explanations, you simply state your choice clearly and kindly. Mr. Ellis completes the thought, without apology or elaborate justification. I appreciate your concern, but I'm comfortable in my home. Period. But won't that seem cold, dismissive? Not if delivered with love, Mr. Ellis assures him. The key is to acknowledge their concern while holding your boundary. I know you worry about me, and I love you for that. I've thought carefully about this, and I'm at peace with my decision. The jazz trio begins to play, a gentle melody filling the cafe. Mr. Ellis pauses, allowing Thomas to absorb the music for a moment before continuing. I had a friend, Helen, Mr. Ellis says. Brilliant woman, a retired professor. Her daughter wanted her to move in after Helen's husband died. When Helen declined, her daughter began a campaign of well-intentioned pressure. Articles about elder isolation, statistics about falls, daily phone calls to check if Helen was still managing. What did Helen do? One day she simply said, Margaret, I love you dearly, but I need you to trust that at 72, I'm capable of making sound decisions about my own life. My choice to live independently isn't a rejection of you. It's an affirmation of myself. And her daughter accepted that. Thomas sounds skeptical. Not immediately, Mr. Ellis acknowledges. But Helen stopped the cycle of explanation and justification. She redirected their relationship from one of management to one of mutual respect between adults. Thomas nods slowly. It's about releasing the need to be understood perfectly by everyone. Exactly, Mr. Ellis confirms. Some misunderstandings aren't worth the energy it would take to correct them. That energy is better spent living the life you choose. That feels liberating, Thomas admits. Exhausting too, but liberating. Most freedom requires courage, Mr. Ellis says simply. But the alternative, living constrained by others' perceptions, is far more exhausting in the long run. The music swells slightly, then settles into a rhythm that seems to complement their conversation, thoughtful but with an underlying vitality. And the eighth thing? Thomas asks after a moment. You mentioned 8 things we should never surrender. Mr. Ellis smiles, a gentle warmth in his expression. The 8th, and perhaps most precious, is your last firsts. My last firsts, Thomas repeats, puzzled. Yes, the new experiences that still await you, Mr. Ellis clarifies. At our age, it's easy to believe that all our significant firsts are behind us. First love, first job, first home, first child. We fall into thinking our lives are about managing what remains rather than discovering what's next. He leans forward, his voice gaining intensity without rising in volume. But that's the greatest surrender of all, relinquishing your right to continue experiencing life with freshness and wonder. I'm not sure I follow, Thomas admits. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you did something for the first time? Mr. Ellis waits as Thomas considers the question. I can't remember, Thomas finally admits. It's been years, I think. That's exactly my point, Mr. Ellis says kindly. We stop collecting firsts as if we've reached some arbitrary quota. But life continues to offer new experiences until our final day, if we remain open to them. What kind of firsts are possible at our age? Thomas asks, curious now. Endless ones, Mr. Ellis responds with enthusiasm. First time learning a new language, first time watching the sun rise over the ocean, first time writing a poem, first time teaching someone else a skill you've mastered, first time speaking your truth without filters. Thomas's expression begins to shift from doubt to interest. These last firsts, Mr. Ellis continues, are often more meaningful than our earlier ones because we bring to them a lifetime of context and appreciation. We experience them not with the recklessness of youth, but with the deliberate presence of age. I've never thought about it that way, Thomas admits. Most people don't, Mr. Ellis nods. That's why they miss the invitation that each day still extends. The invitation to experience something new, to feel a fresh emotion, to see the world through slightly different eyes. The jazz pianist plays a particularly beautiful phrase, and both men pause to appreciate it before continuing. I have a list, Mr. Ellis says after a moment, a list of firsts I still want to experience. I add to it regularly. Some items are grand, places I want to visit, skills I want to learn. Others are small, foods I've never tried, conversations I want to have. What's on your list now? Thomas asks. Learning to play chess properly, seeing the Northern Lights, reading War and Peace, writing a letter to my younger self, Mr. Ellis smiles, and spending an evening listening to jazz with a new friend who's beginning to remember himself. Thomas looks touched by this inclusion. I think I'd like to make a list of my own. I highly recommend it, Mr. Ellis encourages, not as a bucket list of achievements, but as a reminder that your capacity for new experience remains intact. It's strange, Thomas reflects. We spend so much of our lives accumulating possessions, relationships, accomplishments, and then suddenly the narrative shifts to one of preservation and loss, as if the only direction left is backward or downward. Exactly, Mr. Ellis affirms. But what if we remained collectors until the end, not of things, but of moments, insights, connections, firsts? Thomas sits with this idea, his expression opening. I used to want to learn Italian. My grandmother was from Florence, but she never taught us the language. I've always regretted not learning. There's your first item, Mr. Ellis nods approvingly. What else? I've never been camping under the stars, Thomas admits. My wife doesn't like the outdoors much, so we always stayed in hotels when traveling. Add it to your list, Mr. Ellis encourages. Perhaps your grandson would join you, creating a first for both of you, and Thomas smiles at the thought. Yes, he might enjoy that. These last firsts, Mr. Ellis says, his voice taking on a gentle intensity, they're not just activities to pass the time, they're declarations that your story is still unfolding, that you refuse the narrative that says your most significant chapters are behind you. The jazz trio concludes their first set, and soft applause fills the cafe. In the brief silence that follows, Thomas looks at Mr. Ellis with new clarity. These 8 things, he says slowly, they're all forms of reclamation, aren't they? Taking back what age or circumstance or other people have tried to take from us. Perceptive observation, Mr. Ellis nods. Yes, your pace, your storyline, your curiosity, your emotional intuition, your solitude, your sense of humor, your right to be misunderstood, and your last firsts. These are the territories of selfhood that too many surrender without realizing their value. And once surrendered, Thomas asks, they can always be reclaimed, Mr. Ellis assures him. That's the beauty of this stage of life. We have the wisdom to recognize what matters and the perspective to prioritize it. All that's required is the courage to reach for it. Thomas takes a deep breath, something shifting in his posture, a straightening, an awakening. I think I've been waiting for permission, he admits, to continue being fully alive. The only permission needed is your own, Mr. Ellis says simply. The world may offer narratives about aging as decline, but you don't have to accept them. You get to write your own story, one that acknowledges the changes of age while refusing to be defined solely by them. The jazz trio begins their second set, a more upbeat number that seems to infuse the cafe with renewed energy. Around them, conversations continue, lives intersect briefly before continuing on their separate paths. But at their small table, something significant has transpired. Not just a conversation, but a transmission of possibility. Thank you, Thomas says finally, for all of this, for seeing me. I recognize the journey because I've walked it myself, Mr. Ellis replies. And now, perhaps, you'll help someone else remember these 8 sacred things when you see that same look in their eyes. The look that says they've handed over the keys to their own life. I think I would like that, Thomas says, a new purpose in his voice. To pass this on. That's how wisdom works, Mr. Ellis smiles. Not hoarded but shared, not imposed but offered. And in the sharing, it grows stronger in ourselves. Outside the cafe windows, evening has settled fully over the town. Streetlights casting pools of golden light on the sidewalk. Inside, the music continues, a soundtrack to countless stories unfolding simultaneously. Some ending, others just beginning. And at their table, 2 men sit in the gentle recognition that life's most important chapters aren't determined by age but by courage. The courage to reclaim what matters most, to protect what feeds the soul, and to continue becoming until the very end. Great story, isn't it? I want you to picture Thomas and Mr. Ellis one last time. Think about which of these resonated most with you today. Perhaps it was the permission to move at your own pace in a world that demands urgency. Or maybe it was the reminder that your story still has important chapters waiting to be written. Remember that reclaiming these parts of yourself isn't selfish, it's sovereign. It honors not just who you are, but who you've always been beneath the roles and responsibilities that may have defined you. You've earned the right to live authentically, to want things openly, to take up space unapologetically. So I invite you to start today. Reclaim just one of these sacred things, protect it fiercely, nurture it daily. Share it only by choice, never by obligation, because if life is indeed a book, then these years after 60 are when the writing gets most honest, and only you should hold the pen. Do you want more advice like this? Let's optimize your best years together. Like and subscribe if you're committed to becoming a great version of yourself. Thanks for watching.